Today we're going to look at the issues involved with buying a property in Japan, and luckily I have Ziv Nakajima-Magen to guide us through those issues. We'll also look at why a go-between or an agent like Ziv is really a great idea because of the complexities involved in this market, especially if you can't speak Japanese. And so, let's continue. I know that the idea of buying Japanese real estate can seem intimidating, especially if you don't speak Japanese. So today, I want to introduce Ziv Nakajima-Magen as my first guest to help ease your way into the sometimes confusing Japanese real estate market. Ziv is co-founder of Nippon Tradings International, a buyer's agency and portfolio management firm based in Japan that helps take the confusion out of buying Japanese real estate for foreign nationals, such as people like myself. Now, Ziv and I have been communicating over the past year, and he's been extremely helpful and patient in cutting through my misconceptions about Japanese property, for which I am very grateful. Welcome, Ziv, and thanks for taking the time today.
Pleasure.
Even though I've been here a number of times, I'm still a novice when it comes to Japan. I don't speak the language much yet, only a little bit. And you've been here for, how long have you been here now?
Just going on 12 years now.
12 years. Well, you can do a lot in 12 years. As I've seen from looking at your stuff, you've set up a pretty impressive organization. The thing about Japan is that unlike some Asian countries, there's no issues for foreigners to buy properties in Japan, which is great. Given that there's no issue with that, firstly, Ziv, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to a foreigner in buying property in Japan?
The banks won't let you open a bank account. The real estate agents are terrified of working with you for fear of misunderstandings. Landlords don't want to rent to you, not even in a case of a purchase, but even renting is very difficult, often even more difficult. You get over to a lawyer's office or a legal affairs bureau to handle the ownership transfers, any government agency. It's very rare that anyone would actually be able to communicate with you in English. Documentation would be in Japanese. And while you're legally allowed to buy the property, you're not legally allowed to sign documents that you can't read. So there are all of these little smaller and bigger hurdles that you have to navigate through to actually practically logistically manage a purchase and then management of a property here.
I mentioned in my last video, I think, that you can open a bank account here, but you really have to be a resident. You can't just be a foreign national, can you?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you know from our discussions, my interest in Japanese property revolves more around lifestyle rather than investment. But I think many people would like to know whether Japanese property is also an investment opportunity. What's your feeling on that?
It's definitely an investment opportunity. Our company has been around for about 13 years now, almost 14. And at the start, I'd say about half of that time, all we were doing was investment properties. So we initially started our journey by purchasing investment properties for ourselves, and then figuring out that people could use help with the process, started to market our services to other people. Until the Akiya boom and until we started getting more and more inquiries about, like yourself, about people interested in holiday homes or family residences or short-term stays, we haven't actually done any of that. So before we even started with holiday homes, we already had a couple of hundred of investment property purchases under our belt. So it's a very valid and feasible investment market, but it's counterintuitive to what many people assume would be an investment environment in more Western countries or even in other Asian countries. So, for example, people in the States or in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, kind of purchase with the assumption that property will gain value over time if they hold on to it over an extended period of time, or they might try to time a particular peak in a particular local market. And the investment is done with the concept of essentially leveraging on that extra equity down the track, then selling at a profit. Those things, while they can happen here, are a lot less predictable than they would be in other markets. So in the last 12, 13 years, we've had growth in major metropolitan centers and recently even in rural areas, but that's on the back of 25 years of deflation where property prices were almost half of what they were in the early 90s or late 80s, right? So it could happen, but we wouldn't advise to our customers to bank on that as any given criteria in the selection of properties. If you buy a central Tokyo property, it could potentially gain value. It has been gaining in value for the last few years, but your cash flow will be very, very low. And then if that equity, if that rise in price doesn't occur, then you could have been either negatively geared or very close to zero over a period of, let's say, 10 years. This is a cash flow oriented market compared to other Western or, let's say, developed countries. The cash flow here is relatively high in relatively good locations. The other attraction of this market is that even now, after these last 12, 13 years of growth in many places, there are still many, many places in Japan that are good tenancy markets, but are still very affordable. So that affordability also translates into diversity, into hedging, right? For the price of a single asset overseas, you can buy 4 or 5 of them here, all of them generating income. If one tenant moves out, you've lost 20, 25% of your income stream, not the entire income stream like you would if you owned a single asset. So the affordability enables people to enter the market at a lower level, and also enables people with a higher budget to diversify more. And that translates into geographic diversity over the country, socioeconomic, different types of tenants, different types of properties, a lot of things that you can do with that. And I think the third attraction to this particular investment environment is that it's very headache and hassle free. So you've mentioned the bureaucracy and everything being done in a certain way here. That also translates into a lot of peace of mind. So everything has got a paper trail to the moon and back. The professional companies and that you work with here in Japan are, I mean, they might be more or less professional in what they do, but they're never going to have their hand in your pocket, or you don't need to be concerned that they'll, declare bankruptcy and run for the hills with your money. Those sort of things don't really happen here. It's a very legal recourse kind of well-documented, monitored and controlled environment, which appeals to people like me. It doesn't appeal to other people, obviously.
Sure.
And the tenants as well are very hassle-free. They like to stay in the same place for as long as they can. They prefer for nothing to change. They're not going to trouble you with constant requests and complaints and cause damage to properties. Drug labs, ghettos, looters, squatters, those kinds of things don't really happen here.
Right.
So that enables, again, people who are that way inclined. It's not everyone, but myself, for example, I like to set and forget, right? I like to complete a deal, put it in place, know that the income is coming in regularly. I don't need to worry about it and move on to the next deal. And I can do that here. In other countries, I constantly have to be tweaking and monitoring and making sure that no one's, doing anything that they shouldn't be doing with the property. It's just hassle-free, headache-free market. So from those aspects and others, we can discuss that, to the moon and back, but it's a very attractive investment environment for people who are interested in those aspects. If you're looking for a quick deal, money to be made over 3-4 years, exploding, borrowing again against your equity, creative finance, that's not a market for that. Right?
And I like that. And you know how crazy the prices are in the Australian real estate market at the moment. In my hometown, and you lived in the Gold Coast, my hometown is Brisbane, the median house price there is 925,000 Australian dollars, which is just over 600,000 US. Now, let's say I wanted to buy a property in Japan.
That buys me, I gotta point out, that buys me a couple of small buildings, 4 to 8 units in good locations.
It's great.
Suburban metro center.
And that brings up my point. And let's say I wanted to buy a property in Japan. What, in terms of, say, from an investment point of view, like apartments, that kind of thing, what do you feel is the lowest price that someone could expect to start with to get into the Japanese housing market?
Well, practically, there are still some, older studio type units available in suburban locations in reasonable cities, not the top tier, maybe second tier or third tier cities that are still, have got good population and employment fundamentals, but do not stand to grow in value that much. The tenant profile would be lower income earners, convenience store workers, entry-level salarymen, retired semi-destitute pensioners, that kind of thing. In those types of locations, those profiles of properties, you can still purchase for as low as, I'd say, 30,000 US.
Okay, that's a big difference from American Australian property, which would be 10, 15 times more than that, I suppose.
Yeah, 100 and 150 is usually where they would start, wouldn't be below most cases. But those are not the best profile properties and best profile tenants. So they stand to lose value a lot quicker because they're older and less central. And the tenants, again, it's Japan. They're not going to be criminals, but they would potentially occasionally, have to terminate mid-lease because they can't afford the rent, or they would have few delays or late payments or missing payments. You might have to kick them out, which again, all of these things are not a big deal in Japan. It's easily doable, but it does take from your mental bandwidth, and it does eventually create a fluctuating yield because you got a longer vacancy suddenly in the middle. You have to pay some extra expenses that you weren't banking on. So it's not as stable and as nice of an investment. I would say to practically get something that would comply with all of those attractive features mentioned before, I would probably start at about 5-6 million yen. So in Australian dollar terms, that's what, about 50-60,000, maybe 45-50 US.
Still, that's way ahead of anything in Australia or America at the moment. Given that, what would you recommend as a first step if someone doesn't speak Japanese and they wanted to invest in Japan? Invest or buy a property for a lifestyle, either way.
Well, I mean, I would educate yourself a little bit at least first. I would get in touch with a foreigner-friendly agent who would service you in English with English documentation, English explanations, be able to handle the purchase remotely because you don't want to come here for every signing meeting and every little payment of funds that you need to. But the due diligence, the stuff that you need to educate yourself on are quite different, whether if it's an investment property versus a holiday home. And the realtors in Japan are, again, they're by the book. They're very polite and professional, and they're not going to swindle you, but they are realtors. They're transaction oriented. So they're not going to tell you, in most cases, there are some rarities, but most of them will not tell you what questions you want to be asking. They're not going to prioritize one listing over another for you and point out the features. In some cases, they will a little bit, but they're not there to make sure you get the best deal for your money. They're there to help you conclude a particular transaction, either that they've researched for you or that you provided them with a listing yourself, right? So it's not a bad idea to have someone on your side, either a friend or a colleague or a family member who's done this before, at least a little bit familiar with the things you might want to look at. Or if you don't have anyone like that, maybe hire someone like us. Or I would say to get over the language and cultural barrier, you can hire pretty much anyone who speaks polite Japanese, right? You can hire an exchange student who's worked in a Japanese company for even a month or two. They know how to speak politely and introduce you and help you purchase logistically. Right. But it's a good idea because, again, the market here can be a bit counterintuitive to what you'd expect in other markets. The things that you want to look out for might be a little bit different, and we can talk about that for days on end, but it's a good idea to have someone on your side who knows what they're doing, just to help you avoid costly mistakes and select the right kind of property for your criteria.
That's a good lead into my next question, which is, on your website, you describe yourself as a one-stop shop. Now, what do you mean by that?
Our service is beneficial to buyers on two fronts. We're just focusing on the buying process now. We can talk about the management later. But for the purchase process itself, one is, again, the expertise and making sure that you're not making any costly mistakes, reviewing documents before anyone signs them to make sure there's no hidden surprises in there, conducting the right due diligence on the building if it's a condo that you're buying, or on the house or the building that if it's an entire structure that you're buying, structural inspection. So we make sure you do everything right. The other advantage of hiring someone like us is that we'll give the Japanese side a Japanese face to work with. So whereas if a foreigner on their own, especially one who doesn't reside here and or doesn't speak read write Japanese, when we contact Japanese real estate agents, again, we run into, in particular locations like central Tokyo, Niseko up in Hokkaido, maybe a handful of agents in Osaka, a couple in Fukuoka. There are agents who are able to service foreigners directly in English. But that gives you, depending on which agency you contacted, that might give you access to the particular properties that they're interested in selling or that they're listing themselves. You're going to be limited in your ability to access the entire market if you only have to focus on working with those people who can service you directly in English. So a company like ours gives you the advantage of opening up not the entire market, because there'll still always be 10-15% who don't want to work with anyone, even if there's a foreigner at the far end of it. But in most cases, we are able to, convince everyone involved that They don't need to worry about, they never have to speak to the scary foreigner at the other end. Everything will be done in Japanese, the way that they're used to. We've got a power of attorney document enabling us to sign all the documents, attend all the meetings on the scary foreigners' behalf. And that just opens up the market with other agencies that would normally be foreigner shy.
So let's say that someone did buy a property through you and lives in America or Australia or elsewhere. They don't have residency here. How do they manage the property from afar?
That's again a service that we can provide. So if it's a short-term stay management, for example, if you get a property that you're renting out on Airbnb, a lot of those companies do have English speakers in-house. They cater to foreign guests, obviously, and they would be able to also cater to you as a landlord. But in most other cases, if you're just purchasing a home for your own personal use, or you're renting an investment property out long-term or by the month, in those cases, again, the management companies are usually not going to be able to service you in English, and definitely not going to be able to handle remote transactions of funds overseas. They've just never done it. They don't know how to do it, and they're not interested in learning. So we can provide the management service on your behalf. So same as we would have done with the purchase, we are in contact with local real estate agents, local management companies, local owner unions, insurance companies. We would do the same thing by collecting your income into our own bank accounts, because you can't open a bank account, providing you with an annual statement of income and expenses, sending funds to you when you want us to. We'll be the contact person for utility companies, for cleaners, for gardeners, building management companies, insurance companies, and so forth. So again, single point of contact for you, and we will be handling all of the third parties in Japan on your behalf.
In my case, as we've discussed in the past, my interest has always been Akiya as a lifestyle choice. And like you, I have a Japanese wife, which makes the journey easier. But for someone without that advantage, you can't speak Japanese, is buying an Akiya itself something you could help them with?
We can definitely help them with it, but we always ask them in advance if they know what they're getting into, because you've been exploring the topic for quite some time now, so you're fairly well educated. But a lot of the people who approach us for the first time approach us based on a dream or an article that they've read in some magazine or a show that they saw on the internet somewhere, where there's this couple and they bought this property, $5,000 or $2,000, and they've turned it into a dream home in the Japanese countryside, or running a successful Airbnb, or whatever the case may be. Those dreams are all achievable, but there are a lot of obstacles on the way to getting there, right? If you're buying a very cheap property, it's going to need a huge amount of renovations. It's going to cost you several times the price of the property again in many cases. And the cheaper it is, the more likely the cheaper and older it is, the more likely that is to be the case. In some cases, you find out in a structural inspection damage, whether it's termites or tilting or sinking or the roof, like something is so in such a bad condition, then it's not even worth fixing. And then you might be stuck with a property that would be cheaper to just demolish and rebuild a new property, but that wasn't within your budget that you've specified for yourself. You might be operating in a neighborhood where the community is not that welcoming to foreigners, whether from overseas or even from within Japan. I mean, there are some very rural communities that are not even welcoming to people from Tokyo, right? And there are a lot of shows and articles in Japanese media talking about this exact topic. You might be finding it very difficult to find local contractors to work with for various reasons. You might have not factored in the fact that, yes, there's a bus running to and from somewhere nearby the property, but that bus only runs twice a day. There are a lot of things to look into when you're purchasing an Akiya in the countryside. And the further away from the city and the cheaper it is, the more that becomes true. There are a lot of checkboxes that you want to tick. And there's a lot of practical discussions to have about what exactly you're planning to do with that property and how feasible that might be, that we would normally recommend to conduct before pulling the trigger on a purchase like that.
Let's say, Ziv, that I don't want to go through the hassle of searching for a house or an Akiya and get you to do all that for me. If so, what sort of costs are we looking at?
Well, our service would include research, but in the case of people who are buying like yourself for personal use of various sorts, you're always going to be the best filter, right? So the research, because you can look at a few pictures, a floor layout, a map, pin location, and immediately know if that property ticks your boxes or not. Look at the interior features, the exterior features, and you know if it appeals to you or not. With us, it's going to be a lot more of a hit and miss situation because we don't live in your head. We don't know what exactly appeals to you on a personal level. So it's usually going to be a mix of us holding your hand and showing you the websites that you can search on and how to translate them. Akiya, I'm not sure if people are familiar with that, is a very useful resource in English. It scrapes all of the major Japanese property websites and puts them in a Zillow-like map graphic format with filters, makes it very easy to search. So we would be guiding you on the tools and then helping you prioritize your short list and pointing out things that you may have not, might have missed when you looked at those listings initially. Then you'll be back to the drawing board and fine-tuning it. So we'll work with you. We can research everything for you, but again, that's going to be a lot more hit and miss. We're going to give you, 15, 20 properties, and you're going to say that, 90% of them don't actually gel with yourself or your wife for various reasons. So we would be more comfortable guiding you in research and then supporting you on the sidelines. The cost for that is included in our fixed price. So if we're handling the entire purchase for you, that's a fixed price percentage of the property cost or the budget that you factored in. And then that would include the research, it would include the due diligence, it would include inquiries on, as many as 10 or 20 properties until we land on the one.
I'll make sure I put links in the description box to go to your site. I think you've got all that on your site.
Yes.
The breakdown. Okay, that's great. I'm very optimistic about the Japanese property market, but I don't want to give the impression that it's all rainbows and unicorns. What would you say are some of the dangers or downsides that buyers should be aware of?
Well, like we've mentioned with tenants, they're generally hassle-free from what we would expect from a Western perspective. So there's no deadbeats and drug labs. But Japan being Japan, it's got other issues. So the population decline here means that a lot of your tenants will be, again, semi-destitute pensioners, retirees, people that don't work anymore, are not in contact with their families at all, if they even have a family, and are generally, they could be living in the unit for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. Definitely, we have a lot of tenants who have been there for 10 and 20 years. And especially the men tend to be, unfortunately, very heavy smokers in many cases. They never open the windows. They don't want to deal with anyone outside of the property. So they're not going to contact the property manager when the wallpaper starts to peel or the mold begins to grow in the bathroom. And then when they move out or pass away, then you walk in there and it's a bit of a disaster, right? It's not a disaster because of any damage that they've done, but it's just neglect.
Sure.
You have hikikomori, like those social recluses who, again, even a younger crowd can just stay in the property, never leave, do their entire life's business in there without once opening a window or a curtain, and obviously that takes its toll on the interior. When you're buying in buildings that are close to 40 years or older, that's when the building will start taking a lot more maintenance on a more regular basis. And building fees, as a result, will be escalating a lot more quickly once the building hits about 40 years. That obviously eats significantly into your yield and into your resale price as well, because those tiny units will be bought by investors and they're not going to buy it, unless they reach a certain yield level. So your price tends to start falling off a cliff when they hit about 40 years of age. You want to purchase a property that's within 10-minute walk to a subway or train, in some cities, maybe tram station. If it's a major station like Tokyo Station in Tokyo or Hakata Station in Fukuoka, then maybe 15 minutes is okay. But beyond that, it'll be hard to tenant. First floor units, especially ones that are, easily viewable or accessible from the streets, are going to be shunned by single females. Yeah, I mean, again, it's something we can talk about for days and weeks on end. Buildings of 5 floors and less might not have an elevator. You want to look into that before you purchase a unit on the 5th or 4th floor, because, again, Japan's population trend being what it is, a lot of your tenants are going to be elderly, and then they're not going to walk up 4 or 5 flights of stairs. Single moms with tons of shopping bags, same story, right? So, the building's renovation history needs to be correlated with how much they've got in their reserve funds to make sure that they're not out of money and will need a big renovation soon, and that'll double the monthly fees again. I mean, endless. With a house, we've mentioned the structural inspections required. Potential disputes with neighbors. If you're buying a very old house, it might have been constructed pre-zoning regulations. Part of the house might not be registered. There might be roads leading to the property that are actually owned by private property owners and not public roads. You want to make sure there's a memorandum in place allowing you to use, again, endless.
Okay, great info, Ziv. So I'm just wondering, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what's your feeling about the future of property investment or buying property in Japan?
Well, from our perspective, and it's been that way since definitely we got into business, and I'm sure before that, and I think that will continue for at least the next few decades. What the demographics are doing is that the smaller local villages and townships are conglomerating into the bigger cities. So if you look at the population from most of the big cities in Japan, they're all either stable or increasing in population to various degrees. That is unlikely to change in the next few decades, regardless of what the government will do with increasing birth rates or immigration, if they will. So from my perspective as an investor, I never look more than 5 or 10 years ahead because I'm not going to know what's going to happen. What I'm looking for is to get my capital back or close to it within a certain amount of time, and then reselling and looking at what to invest in next. So thinking beyond 10 years is going to be a bit difficult for me to estimate in any case. I don't know what's going to happen macro and microeconomically. I'm looking 10 or 20 years ahead, and the fundamentals of investing in particular locations in Japan during that period of time hasn't changed yet. If it will, we'll go elsewhere.
So I also want to point out that Ziv runs the Japan Real Estate Summit each year, and you can attend in person or online, I believe, Ziv.
Yes, that's correct. Twice a year, usually in April and October.
Okay. And I think you also run other events that you can sign up for and get your newsletter as well.
Yes, we do occasionally have little webinars, seminars. We do investor tours in various parts of the country that people can sign up for, or we can organize a private one for them. So anything related to real estate. And I've got another company, Nippon Bridge, that helps with other stuff. So people who are considering relocating to Japan, investing in businesses in Japan, we do a lot of that as well.
I think you're a great first choice, even though I'll be covering other people in the future. Mainly, I think that you're a good choice because you're quite easy to get along with, and your company's services are really comprehensive. People can take all or some of those services depending on their circumstances. For people watching, I highly recommend Ziv. I think you'd be happy for people to get in contact with you if they have questions or they're interested in using your services.
Yes, of course. We're always happy to talk shop. At the moment, we're a bit swamped. We haven't properly prepared for the growing pains that we're experiencing now. So we're in the midst of recruiting and hiring and training, and we're not going to be able to do the full purchase facilitation, single point of contact that we've just mentioned until early or mid next year. But what we have been doing is we've been putting people directly in touch with foreigner-friendly agents, and then we join in as consultants and hold their hand along the way. So the process is logistically identical. They just need to talk to one other third party except just us.
Okay, well, if those full services will be available in the new year, that's great because it gives people more chance to actually do some background research before they get to you instead of coming in cold. And if not,
we do love to talk shop. I mean, we love it even more if we can record the conversation because it brings value to other people as well on our Japan Real Estate podcast or YouTube channel. But regardless of that, even if we're not recording anything, we're always happy to talk shop. There's I wouldn't say limitless, but we're very happy to have conversations and consultations and give people our 2 cents about properties they're looking at. So don't be shy to reach out.
Okay, great. To the people watching, I highly recommend Ziv and his company, Nippon Tradings International, if you want to get started in this market, whether it's a lifestyle choice or for investment opportunities. Ziv has your back. And so thank you very much for today, Ziv. I really appreciate it. There's some great information there, which I think will help people on their own journey to finding either an Akiya or an investment property in Japan. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, and keep up the good work. Love what you're doing on the YouTube channel. I'm a big fan.
No, thank you. I'll keep it up. And hopefully I will one day get the Akiya that I'm searching for. We'll see.
Oh, we'll get there, I'm sure.
For sure.
Thanks for your time.
No worries. Thanks for that, Ziv.
So that excellent discussion from Ziv gives you an idea of what's involved in buying property in Japan. But if you need a step-by-step guide to how to find an Akiya and buy it, then I've made this ebook called 7 Steps to Buying a Cheap House in Japan, and that will guide you through the process from beginning to end. The book is only $5. You can find the details in the description box below. Ziv, he's been great in dealing with me and my interests, so I highly recommend him. My Japanese is limited. It's enough to get me by on a day-to-day basis. You know, I can buy food, I can catch trains and buses, I can have limited conversations with people. But when it comes to dealing with real estate, then getting a go-between, like Ziv for instance, is really a no-brainer because of the complexity involved. And if you don't speak fluent Japanese, then you're going to have a hard time. So seriously, consider getting someone to act on your behalf. It will make life a hell of a lot easier.